As always, if the cockpit interior is too dark, activate the flashlight with left Alt plus L. If the yellow cross cursor is not visible, press left Alt plus C to show it. Also, you can press spacebar to cut short long texts. This training mission is a continuation of our previous training lessons, where we will be performing a navigation towards the Mineral Nievoti Air Base, a visual approach, straight-in landing, taxi, and shutdown, using procedures as described on the flight manual of the real aircraft, but adapted for use on the Pucara aircraft of DCS. This mission includes the following sections: navigate to the destination airbase, visual approach, straight-in landing, taxi to ramp, shutdown. Communications with ATC have been omitted, as the aircraft does not yet have a radio able to communicate with the DCS AI units. The mission begins with your aircraft already in the air, at an altitude of 10,000 feet, and at 30 nautical miles from the destination, on a non-direct heading. I have paused the simulation while I explain the basics to navigate towards our destination. Your first task is to determine the approximate location of our destination in relationship to our own, and then navigate towards it. For this, we will use the Pucara VOR receptor, to tune the VOR station of Mineral Nievoti. VOR is short for Very High Frequency Omnidirectional Range, and it is a navigation device that shows on which direction the VOR station is, with respect to our position. The VOR is mated to a DME device, which adds range information, telling us how far away we are from the station. To use our VOR receptor, our first task is to tune it to the VOR station's frequency. For Mineral Nievoti, the VOR frequency is 117.10 MHz. The highlighted control is a double concentric knob, where its center knob tunes the decimal part of the frequency and its outer knob tunes the integer part. A right click increases the value, while a left click decreases it. Use both knobs to select the 117.10 frequency value, instead of its default 108.10 MHz. Press spacebar once 117.10 is on the display. OK. The next step is to enable the VOR navigation, by setting the highlighted VOR switch to on. Good. Now on the RMI gauge, radio magnetic indicator, the double needle is active and pointing towards the VOR station of our destination airbase. The single needle is used to show our desired heading. The runway at our destination airbase has a heading of 295 degrees, so turn the highlighted knob using the mouse wheel, until it is pointing at that heading. Be aware that the knob does not allow to turn from 0 to 359, so you have to turn the mouse wheel the other way around. Press spacebar once the single needle is pointing to 295 degrees. On the adjacent ILS gauge, the small numeric window displays the distance to the VOR station, on nautical miles. The rightmost digit is decimal, thus a display of 401 means 40.1 nautical miles. OK, now that our VOR equipment is properly tuned, I have unpaused the mission. Adjust the pitch lever for a cruise speed of 250 knots, and use the trim hat to attain stable and level flight. Remember that a change in speed always requires a trim adjustment. Press spacebar once you have the aircraft in stable and level flight. Keep flying the current course. Cruise at 10,000 feet altitude and 250 knots indicated airspeed. We need to intercept the runway imaginary line that is represented on the RMI by the single needle. As the double needle points towards the left side, it means that the VOR is to our left, so we must intercept the runway heading needle such that its arrow is also pointing to our left. To perform the interception, you will turn the aircraft to the left until the single needle is horizontal and with its arrow pointing in the same general direction as the VOR. Begin the turn now. Pull a bit from the flight stick so that you don't lose altitude during the turn. Good. Now your aircraft is heading on a direction perpendicular to the runway centerline represented by the single needle. Level the aircraft and keep this course. It should be around 25 degrees. You will notice that as we continue flying on this direction, the two RMI needles, the single one representing the runway heading, and the double one representing the VOR direction, will begin to approach one another. Eventually, both needles will superimpose each other. At that point our aircraft will be exactly over the runway heading line. When that happens, we will turn left again, until both needles point to the 12 o'clock position on the RMI. At that moment, our aircraft would be heading towards the VOR, flying on the runway heading, both being aligned. We are now at 30 nautical miles from the destination, as you can see on the ILS gauge. Begin a very shallow descent, such that you reach 7,000 feet when 20 nautical miles away, and 4,000 feet when 10 miles away. The Pucara has no radio altimeter, so all altitudes are barometric and the destination airbase is at an altitude of 1,050 feet ASL. The two needles on the RMI gauge should be starting to superimpose each other. This means that we will soon be crossing an imaginary line that extends from the runway. Just before the needles merge, turn the aircraft left, towards the destination airbase, until both needles point to the top of the RMI, its 12 o'clock position. Good, now our aircraft is pointing towards the destination airbase. Now, concentrate on keeping the RMI needles pointing to the top of the dial. The course should be around 295 degrees. Also, Maintain a shallow descent towards the airbase. At 20 nautical miles away you should be at 7,000 feet altitude, while at 10 miles you should have descended until 4,000 feet. We are now at 25 nautical miles from the destination. Press F10 to check the map for other air traffic that there may be nearby, as we can't rely on the air traffic controller. Press F1 to return to the cockpit after the check. We are now at 20 nautical miles from the VFR station. Your altitude should be 7,000 feet, correct your descent rate if not. Begin reducing speed by pulling the propeller pitch lever back to reduce power. As the speed reduces, you will need to retrim the aircraft. Activate the landing lights with a right click on the highlighted switch. The Pucara doesn't have speed brakes, so once you reach 150 knots extend the landing gear and its drag will help you reduce speed. At 140 knots, extend the flaps. This will further reduce speed. Retrim the aircraft to keep level attitude. We are now at 10 nautical miles from the VFR station. Your altitude, the increased drag of the flaps will force you to add power with the propeller pitch lever. Try to keep a speed of 120 knots through the remainder of the descent. We are now at 5 nautical miles from the VOR station. Your altitude should be 2,500 feet, correct your descent rate if not. We are at finals now. Reduce speed to 115 knots and use pitch trim to keep the nose level. Just before touchdown, reduce the speed further, to 100 knots, and lift the nose a bit to touchdown on the main gear and not the nose wheel. Touchdown. Use the rudder to keep the aircraft aligned with the runway. Wait until the nose wheel comes down, before applying wheel brakes. Reduce speed and take the first available exit from the runway, on the left side. This is Street C, proceed forward and then enter to the parking ramp. You can park at any spot within the ramp. Turn off the landing lights, with a left click on the highlighted switch. Next, retract the flaps, by clicking the highlighted lever. You are now at the ramp. Park at any spot within the ramp, but park the aircraft with a U-turn, so that it ends up on a perpendicular heading to the runway. Good, you have parked your aircraft. We will now proceed with the shutdown procedure. 1. First, leave all trimmers in neutral, by checking on their gauge. 2. Propeller pitch lever. Set to its rearmost position, by left-clicking on its lever. This will stop both engines. 3. Left and right fuel pumps. Set both to off. 4. Fuel valve levers. Set to their rearmost position, to close the fuel valves. 5. Oxygen system. Click the highlighted switch to turn it off. 6. Radio and navigation equipment. Set to off. On this particular flight, we only need to power off the VOR receptor. 7. Flaps. Confirm that they are fully retracted. 8. Parking brake. Enable, by moving its lever down to its parked position, with 2 right clicks. On the real aircraft, once wheel chocks have been placed by the ground crew, the parking brake is disabled, so that the crew can move the aircraft later. 9. Canopy, open. Set the highlighted switch to its up position, with a right click. 10. Lights off. Set all lights to off. 10A. Taxi light. Set to off. 10B. Navigation and anti-collision lights. Off. Set both switches to their up positions, to turn off both lights. 10C. Floodlights. Check they are set to off. 10D. Formation lights. Check they are off, with the switch on its down position. 10E. Instruments backlight. Set to off, by turning the highlighted knob to its minimum position. 11. Battery switch. Set to off, its center position. Good, the shutdown procedure is now complete. You are ready to leave the plane. Congratulations, you have managed to navigate towards a VOR station, do a visual approach, land, taxi, and shut down the Pucara. You have successfully finished this training mission. On the next training mission we will learn the IFR landing procedures.